From the time Ayanna Rivers was 6 years old, standing barefoot in the clay-dusted grass of her grandmother's backyard in rural Alabama, watching the silver streaks of fighter jets slicing across the cloudless blue sky, she knew what she wanted: to fly not just any aircraft, but the fastest, fiercest warbirds mankind had ever crafted, to feel the roar of raw jet propulsion beneath her and the weightlessness of altitude where Earth's noise could not follow. Her heart, even then, pulsed to the rhythm of turbine engines and breaking the sound barrier, and though she came from a world where girls like her were more often seen mopping hospital floors or working double shifts at dollar stores than sitting in the cockpits of $150 million machines, Ayanna held that dream close as armor, shielding it through years of poverty, systemic neglect, and whispered doubts from counselors who told her to be realistic when she scribbled fighter pilot at the top of her career path worksheet. She defied it all, aced her way through school, earned a scholarship to Howard University, and enlisted in the Air Force the moment she was eligible, quickly gaining a reputation for precision, unmatched focus and composure under pressure that intimidated even some of her male peers. But that excellence, that very brilliance that should have been celebrated, became a threat to the institution built on a foundation that praised diversity in brochures, but often buckled under the reality of true inclusion. When she entered the elite Air Force pilot training program at Laughlin AFB, she became the only black woman in her class, and one of only a handful ever to step foot in that hangar with a pilot trainee badge and a heart full of fire. At first, they smiled politely, welcomed her with the brand of camaraderie reserved for tokenism, but it didn't take long for the smiles to crack, for her discipline to be interpreted as arrogance, for her confidence to be called insubordination, for the instructors, especially Lieutenant Commander Bates, a stern-faced man who had flown in combat but carried a chip on his shoulder the size of a B-52, to begin nitpicking her flight logs, finding errors that weren't there, and questioning her judgment in simulations even when her decisions were tactically sound and within protocol. Her classmates, a group mostly composed of white men from Air Force families, began whispering when she passed evaluations faster than them, and soon her locker was mysteriously broken into, her flight suit, soaked with aviation grease, her helmet tampered with. But Ayanna, stubborn and proud, said nothing, choosing to believe that grit and results would rise above petty sabotage until the final week of simulator testing, a critical milestone that would determine who would advance to the next phase of fighter pilot qualification. When her sim suddenly malfunctioned mid-mission, causing her to lose control during a high-stress air-to-ground exercise, which resulted in an artificial crash. Despite requesting a review of the software logs, despite video footage that clearly showed system errors, the review board, headed by Bates himself, dismissed her protest and, in a closed-door session, determined that Ayanna had exhibited emotional instability under pressure, branding her with an official DQ, disqualification, and recommending psychological re-evaluation, a move that would permanently bar her from future flight training within the Air Force. And just like that, without a ceremony, without a handshake, without even the respect of a proper dismissal, Ayanna was handed a folder of paperwork and walked out the side gate in civilian clothes, her wings not just clipped, but ripped from her with the bitter sting of injustice. The sky felt farther than ever, her dreams buried under layers of humiliation, fury and heartbreak, but Ayanna did not let herself collapse. She returned to her childhood home for a few months, silent and still, waking each day at dawn as if she still had flight drills, her body unable to let go of discipline, her eyes often staring skyward, watching jets cut the same paths she once hoped to fly. And in those quiet moments, a different resolve took root, not one born of rage but of purpose, of a vow to prove not just to those who had failed her, but to herself, that the dream they tried to kill still lived. She applied to every aerospace and aviation program she could find, was rejected by most, but eventually was accepted into a civilian aeronautics program in Phoenix, Arizona, where she started over as the lowest-level technician, cleaning hangars and fueling crop dusters while studying engine mechanics at night and flying Cessna 172s on weekends for hours that barely counted toward military equivalence, but kept her spirit aloft. She became a fixture at the local airfield, polite but private, always early, never needing instruction twice. And though she had every right to be bitter, she refused to carry it outwardly, choosing instead to channel that energy into becoming, technically flawless. It wasn't long before her instructors, all former military pilots themselves, began noticing something extraordinary, not just in her flying, which was crisp and fearless, but in the way she read wind conditions like a second language, the way she executed barrel rolls with elegance, the way her instincts kicked in milliseconds before others would even blink. Soon she caught the attention of Colonel Frederick Lansing, a retired USAF ace turned contractor for a classified defense research agency working on next-generation flight systems, who saw in her what the Air Force had failed to, not just raw talent, but the mind of a tactician, a leader, a pioneer, and he invited her into a shadow training initiative, one that wasn't bound by the red tape and biases of traditional military channels. And from there, Ayanna Rivers began a journey no one had anticipated, one that would take her beyond the limitations imposed by prejudice and into the rarest echelons of aerial warfare, setting the stage for a return that would not just silence her doubters, but redefine what was possible for every girl who ever looked up and dared to believe the sky belonged to her too. In the blistering heat of the Phoenix Desert, where the sand danced like flame beneath the pounding sun and the skies remained clear enough to feel infinite, Ayanna Rivers rose again, not with the fanfare of rank or uniform, but with the silent fury of someone rebuilding an empire from ashes, brick by unseen brick. After being unceremoniously dismissed from the Air Force's elite flight program, she had re-entered aviation through the back door of civilian aeronautics, pushing brooms and scrubbing grease from hangar floors to get near aircraft, taking scraps of flight time in rickety trainers when she could, often at her own expense, all while studying aerodynamics, propulsion, radar evasion theory, and electromagnetic signal management with a hunger no textbook could fully contain, her mind becoming a vault of knowledge more cutting-edge than many active-duty pilots would ever know. Her work ethic was magnetic, drawing the attention of former Air Force Colonel Frederick Lansing, a man whose career had taken him from the cockpits of F-15s in the Gulf War to the classified boardrooms of black-budget defense projects, and when he offered her a place in a secretive experimental aviation program known only to a few as Project Obsidian, she didn't hesitate. Based out of a remote facility in Nevada, this initiative was a collaboration between the Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, and private aerospace contractors tasked with training pilots capable of maneuvering and testing the F-22 Raptor and beyond, hypersonic jets equipped with adaptive AI, stealth cloaking, and quantum radar jamming systems, the future of American air superiority. Ayanna entered the program under a codename, her past erased from all known records, and immediately immersed herself in a world few even knew existed, where flight suits were laced with biometric sensors and cockpits more resembled spacecraft than planes. Her instructors were men and women with thousands of hours in combat, some legends, others ghosts, but none of them could outfly her for long. Though she lacked the formal military commendations of her peers, Ayanna's skill was undeniable. She learned the Raptor like it was an extension of her own nervous system, mastering the fly-by-wire controls, managing thrust vectoring with surgical precision, learning to execute advanced maneuvers that danced on the edge of stall and recovery like a gymnast leaping through thermals, and within months, she was leading mock dogfights against pilots who once trained Top Gun graduates. Her simulator scores shattered every record Project Obsidian had tracked since its inception, but it wasn't just her reflexes or spatial awareness that made her superior. It was her mindset, the way she approached aerial combat like multidimensional chess, calculating 6 moves ahead, factoring in not just velocity and distance, but psychological pressure, weather anomalies, and battlefield noise. Under Lansing's mentorship, she studied electromagnetic warfare, target acquisition psychology, and stealth tactics developed for lunar combat scenarios. And when the program initiated real-world testing with the F-22 Raptor, still considered the most powerful jet in the U.S. arsenal, despite decades since its creation, Ayana was selected as one of only 2 pilots trusted with unsupervised night flight drills, a mark of confidence that few earned even after years in uniform. Each night, while the world slept, she launched into the black sky from a hidden airstrip, carving silent trails through the stratosphere at Mach 2, weaving between mountains and radar nets like a shadow on a mission no one could trace. Her flight, logged only in a secure vault guarded by retinal scans and code words. It was during these missions that she learned the deeper art of flight, not just the mechanical mastery, but the spiritual bond between human and machine, the moment where the aircraft stops being a tool and becomes something almost divine, a partner, a creature of steel and speed that thinks with you, breathes with you, dreams of the sky with you. And in that sacred space of afterburners and silence, Ayana rediscovered the purpose that had once nearly been destroyed. The dream not just to fly, but to transcend, to break the barrier not just of sound, but of the limiting narratives built around who belonged in the sky and who didn't. Her name began circulating in whispered tones among defense officials, cloaked in anonymity, but marked by awe. The Ghost Eagle, some called her, a phantom pilot whose precision in classified operations was rewriting what it meant to command air dominance. Still, Ayana stayed grounded in humility, remembering her roots, sending anonymous donations to her old high school science program, mentoring young girls through encrypted video calls, and never once seeking recognition or revenge, because her mission had grown larger than herself. It was now about legacy, about being the blueprint for every black girl whose ambition reached beyond the clouds, about proving that resilience could fly farther than hate could reach. Yet fate has a poetic rhythm, and one morning, Lansing summoned her to a private briefing with Pentagon brass where she was informed of a high-profile military air expo, an international demonstration of American air power to Allied forces and defense contractors, to be held at none other than Laughlin Air Force Base, the very place that had stripped her wings and branded her unfit. When Lansing asked if she would serve as the unannounced mystery pilot for the event's climax, demonstrating the F-22's full capabilities in a classified performance designed to shock the global defense community, Ayana didn't flinch. She simply nodded, eyes calm, knowing this was the moment destiny had been building toward from the moment she first stood in that backyard as a girl and whispered, "I want to fly." Her flight path would take her not just over the base, but over the ghosts of her past, the scars of rejection, the silence of injustice, and it would not be an act of vengeance, but of testimony. That she had risen not in spite of them, but, beyond them, that the sky they said she didn't belong to was now hers to command. And this time when she came in for landing, the world would have no choice but to look up and recognize the wings they once tried to break. The desert morning was sharp and clear, the kind of crystalline blue that made the horizon feel infinite, and the sun seemed like it had been carved from pure judgment as Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas buzzed with anticipation for the largest multinational air expo in a decade. A high-stakes exhibition where generals, aerospace executives, foreign defense ministers, and an elite press corps gathered under awnings and glass VIP terraces, all eagerly awaiting the arrival of the world's most formidable flying machines and the pilots who dared tame them. Among the polished boots, dress uniforms, and lanyards of high-level clearance badges, no one noticed the unassuming woman who walked past the perimeter fence hours earlier, dressed in a sleek black flight suit with no rank, no name, and eyes that saw through time itself. Ayana Rivers, the dismissed cadet they'd once laughed at, now back on the same base not to reclaim approval, but to obliterate expectations and redefine what greatness looked like in skin they once deemed too dark and a voice they once deemed too unfit for command. Tucked away in a restricted hangar away from the main crowd was the aircraft that would soon steal the skies, an F-22 Raptor, upgraded with experimental tech courtesy of Project Obsidian, its sleek frame painted in radar-absorbing matte graphite, its turbines purring with barely contained fire, its onboard systems alive with AI interlinked diagnostics, tailored to Ayana's neural patterns from years of private training and classified simulations. While other pilots prepped with checklists and crews, Ayana prepared in silence, mentally syncing with the aircraft systems, her breath slow, her heart steady, her mind replaying the countless nights she spent flying without recognition, without rank, without acknowledgement, only her own belief and the knowledge that this moment would come. The Expo's host, General Mitchell Torrance, a man who'd once signed off on her removal from the flight program, stepped to the stage, unknowing that his keynote event would soon become the ultimate reckoning, and after a series of impressive F-16 stunts, international drone showcases, and a thunderous flyby by a B-2 Spirit, the crowd was told to prepare for a classified surprise known only as Echo 1, a name meant to protect the pilot's identity until after the mission. But the icy moment Ayana's Raptor roared to life from the far runway and took to the air, slicing the sky with supernatural grace and a ferocity that ignored gravity. People began to lean forward, jaws slightly ajar, because no ordinary pilot could bend an F-22 like that. Her takeoff alone, vertical climb followed by an inverted stall into a controlled corkscrew, was something even decorated pilots avoided due to its difficulty and risk, but Ayana executed it with ballerina precision, her hands almost meditative, on the controls as she weaved that aircraft through a choreographed routine of maneuvers that had never been seen in public, defying the parameters outlined in every Air Force manual because she'd written her own language of flight. Barrel rolls blurred into J-turns, S-curves sliced through pockets of compressed air, and as the Raptor vanished from view only to reappear moments later from a completely different direction at an untraceable speed, radar arrays failed to track. The crowd gasped in disbelief, and even the experienced fighter pilots watching from the sidelines began murmuring. This wasn't just a flight demo, this was a statement, a revolution wrapped in jet wash. Inside the control tower, stunned officials asked for the pilot's name, but the response was always the same. Echo 1 is classified. Meanwhile, Ayana pushed the limits of what even the engineers who built the Raptor thought possible, triggering the stealth cloaking in mid-maneuver, turning the aircraft invisible to both radar and the naked eye before reappearing with sonic thunder just above the crowd's heads, inverted at Mach 1.5, leaving hats, phones, and even dignified composure flying into the wind. In that moment, cameras snapped, generals stood up, and a buzz erupted across the airfield. Who the hell was flying that jet? And when Ayana concluded the routine with a vertical spiral ascent that flattened into a glider's descent, before landing with surgical precision on a dime in front of the control tower, the entire base fell silent, as if the atmosphere itself was unsure whether it had just witnessed flight or poetry, myth or miracle. The Raptor powered down, canopy lifting slow like the curtain before a revelation, and as Ayana stepped out, unzipped her helmet, and let the world see the face they once dismissed, there was a stunned pause, a collective inhale of realization, as officers recognized her, reporters scrambled for backstory, and Torrance, red-faced and frozen, could only stare as the cadet he once labeled not command material now stood as the unrivaled queen of the skies. She walked calmly toward the general, each step quiet but thunderous in meaning, her presence alone now an indictment of every door once slammed in her face. And when he stammered her name, "Rivers. Ayana Rivers?" She nodded once and said nothing because her flight had already spoken everything that needed to be said. Applause erupted slowly, awkwardly, then rose into a crescendo of awe and thunderous admiration from allies and adversaries alike, and even a foreign delegate. From the UK whispered to his attaché, "We've just seen the future of aerial combat, and she's unstoppable." But Ayana wasn't there for applause. She was there for testimony, for every black girl ever told she wasn't enough, for every dream deferred by prejudice, for the justice that didn't need words, just wings. She gave a single salute to the sky, not to the flag or the base or the men who once doubted her, but to the infinite possibility she had always known lived above her. And with that, she turned away, leaving behind not just an air show, but a legacy carved into the sky itself, etched in contrails, precision, and a silence so loud it echoed across the globe. The world watched as the footage from the Laughlin Air Force Base air show exploded across global media within hours, first as shaky smartphone clips from stunned attendees, then as polished slow-motion replay segments on international news, stations captioned with headlines like "Mystery Pilot Redefines Aviation" and "The F-22 Flight That Shattered the Sky." But it wasn't until the Pentagon released a rare, verified statement confirming the identity of the pilot as Ayanna Rivers, a formerly dismissed cadet, that the story truly ignited into a cultural firestorm. Overnight, hashtags like Ayanna Rises, F-22 Queen, and She Defies Gravity trended across platforms, spawning reaction videos, tribute art, and analysis from experts and veterans alike, each trying to piece together how someone once labeled unfit could display flight mastery that rivaled legends, some calling her a prodigy, others comparing her to the likes of Chuck Yeager or the Tuskegee Airmen, but none truly grasping the years of invisible labor, isolation, and relentless training. Ayanna had poured into becoming not just a pilot, but a movement in motion. And while public admiration swelled, so too did the questions. Why was she dismissed? Who funded her post-military training? What was Project Obsidian? And as Congress called for hearings, the Air Force scrambled to contain the narrative, realizing their attempt to silence Ayanna had birthed a phenomenon far beyond their control. Meanwhile, Ayanna was flown, ironically, by private military jet, back to D.C., not in cuffs but in command. Her arrival at Andrews Air Force Base greeted by a line of uniformed personnel who saluted in reverence, some of them the same men and women who once passed her in halls without a glance, now unable to meet her eyes without shame or awe. At the Pentagon, she stood before the Joint Chiefs, her expression unshaken as they fumbled through apologies disguised as inquiries, asking if she would consider returning to service, to which she responded, "I never stopped serving. Your vision just wasn't wide enough to see it." And that line alone became the soundbite of the century, repeated by activists, entrepreneurs, educators, and trailblazers across industries who saw their own battles in her flight. Then came the offers. Lockheed Martin, NASA, even SpaceX, all eager to recruit the woman who had just proven that excellence does not come packaged in their assumptions. But Ayanna had other plans. Instead of signing with defense contractors, she used her platform and new visibility to launch Skybound Equity, an aviation school and aerospace think tank built entirely for underrepresented youth, women, and veterans of color, headquartered on a decommissioned airfield in Georgia, where she installed her own fleet of training aircraft, most of which were anonymously donated by private foundations inspired by her mission. With her name now synonymous with aviation revolution, Ayanna became the first black woman to keynote at the Global Aviation Summit, where she didn't just speak about speed and maneuverability, but about the cost of gatekeeping, the architecture of exclusion, and how imagination, not legacy, was the real source of American greatness, earning a standing ovation from international delegates and several teary-eyed cadets who whispered, "She gave us permission to dream." Back at Laughlin, the base that once pushed her out now bore a new name, Rivers Field, after a bipartisan committee fast-tracked its renaming to acknowledge historic injustice and unprecedented contribution, and its flight academy saw its largest enrollment spike of Black and Latina women in its entire history. Ayanna, however, did not linger in fame. Instead, she kept flying, teaching, mentoring, building, and appearing where she was most needed, whether at congressional hearings on aviation reform, rural schools where girls stared wide-eyed at her flight suit, or at memorials honoring those who never got their chance to fly because the system clipped their wings before liftoff. One morning, years later, a girl from Detroit walked into Skybound Equity, clutching a worn photo of Ayanna clipped from an old magazine, eyes full of fire and nerves, whispering, "I want to fly like you." And Ayanna smiled, knelt to meet her eyes and said, "No, you'll fly further." And as the girl beamed, not even realizing she was shaking hands with the woman whose legacy had rewritten military policy, educational outreach, and aerospace access in one flight, Ayanna knew her mission had only just begun. In the hangar behind them sat a newly built jet, sleek, silent, solar-enhanced, co-designed by her students and painted with the names of every trailblazer who had come before: Bessie Coleman, Mae Jemison, Benjamin O. Davis Jr., and now Ayanna. Rivers etched in titanium, not for vanity but for visibility. For the children yet unborn who would look to the skies and understand that their path wasn't limited by prejudice, but lit by possibility, carved open by someone who once walked out of a flight school in shame, but returned flying faster, fiercer and freer than anyone had dared believe possible. And as Ayana climbed back into the sky that day, alone, unbothered by applause, unburdened by the past, undistracted by fame, she rolled the aircraft into a gentle spiral, her fingers steady on the controls, her soul weightless, her heart quiet, her legacy loud enough to rattle the heavens.